Hey guys, today we're talking about inspiration and fundamental religious experiences. Some of you tried to work ahead a little bit on some of the assignments on Canvas, but that is our work for this week. So the picture that you're seeing is just a picture I found at random online, but what a striking image with the mountains and the sun and the clouds. And it's the kind of image that in some way, shape, or form tends to move us. The article that you're reading this week, Aristotle, Augustine, and the Story of Redemption, deals with that idea of things moving us emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, all the different things that can come along as we live our lives on a daily basis. So if you've seen a place like this, or you've been in a place like this, or maybe the ocean, or maybe the beach, or maybe somewhere else in the mountains or in a forest, all the different places that you can go that absolutely positively inspire you. Okay, so talking about inspiration, I've changed. I've changed locations in my office. Been on behind the bookcases for a few days, so now I want to get on the other wall, and this is my hangout. This is where I do the thing I do for all my hobbies. My hobby is all about music. So some of you know that, and some of you have. We've talked about that along the way. So I just wanted to give a different background, just some of you to look at differently than looking at my bookcases. So we hope everybody's well. We hope everybody is doing okay. We know things are changing and shifting every single day, and with the quote unquote stay at home order here in North Carolina, things have really sort of wound down quite a bit. Not as many people out and things going on, but we do want to keep working. We've only got a few weeks left till we get through the end of the semester. Actually, the last day of class, I believe, is the 23rd of April. So we're coming up with that really quickly. So today, what we're going to do this week is I've decided, instead of doing a long video like I did last week, covering just one topic, I'm going to do two shorter videos this week. We're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the fundamental religious experiences and the argument and the article about Aristotle and Augustine, and so on. And then there'll be a separate video for this week talking about law and the question of law, where law comes from, and so on. So you'll be able to look at that in a couple of days as well. But I wanted to make sure that you saw this video as you read the first article on Aristotle and Augustine, and then the second video when you're doing your reading in Galatians and the book of Exodus for your major writing assignment this week. I do hope you're well. I know there's lots and lots of fear and different ideas, panic in other cases, just very, very concerned, lots and lots of concerns, and people are very, very sick. So do please continue to take it seriously. I was reading an article in the news this morning of a couple of 20-year-olds who were in desperate physical condition because of being contracting the coronavirus. So you guys, I know you're young. I know most of you are strong, but you have no immunity to this disease. So please, please, please take care of yourselves. Practice good hygiene. Follow the orders of the officials as much as you can. Don't interact and be gathering together in places with lots of people and so on. I read a heartbreaking story this morning of a church, in a mega church in another country in Europe that met in the middle of February. There was over 5,000 people in the service, and somebody had coronavirus. They've tracked somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 cases to that church service. Don't be that person. Please do take care of yourselves and try to take care of the other people around you. Remember, we really are our brother's keepers if we want to go back to Cain and Abel, way back over in the book of Genesis in Genesis chapter 4. So do keep that in mind. All right, so the idea today, then, as I showed you the picture, which I thought was just strikingly beautiful, and I don't know about you, the question today is this: what inspires you? You personally, have you ever been inspired? Some people are inspired by locations. That's why I think in many ways as human beings, we like to travel. We like to go other places because other places inspire us. It's something new. It's something fresh for us to encounter and to experience. And I think we as human beings, I think we need that. We need changes of scenery, which is why you've got to get out of the house and get some fresh air, right? But at the same time, other things inspire us. Perhaps it's a piece of music. I think one of the most inspirational pieces of music, classical music, is Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. If you listen to the whole thing, particularly the crashing, raucous, just raw chords in the very opening, and then that beautiful melody that comes along the way, or Mozart's, of course, Requiem is just fantastically moving. So many other wonderful, great pieces of classical music, but also popular music. I don't listen to a lot of pop music. I've listened to a lot of rock and metal and so on. But just some songs are just so moving. The Rain song by Led Zeppelin to me is one of the most beautiful guitar pieces ever composed. As a musician, music touches me in some ways, perhaps that it doesn't touch other people. But there's other things that can inspire you. You can be inspired by a piece of literature. You can be inspired by a poem. You can be inspired by a person. If we were in class, I would ask you, when we'd be having a discussion, who inspires you in your life? Maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's your parents, maybe it's a brother or sister, maybe it's somebody else that you've known, or maybe it's just somebody that you've read about. Maybe it's a famous sports person or somebody in the legal system, a legislator, depending upon your interests and so on, or just even movies. I mean, movies can be very, very inspirational. If you've ever seen The Pursuit of Happiness or some of those movies that people just overcoming the most desperate of circumstances and struggling. And it is that struggle, it is that fight. And that's what the article that you're reading this week is about. It's about the timing and the circumstances and just where you are in your life at that particular moment when that inspiration strikes. It's a very short article, but it's a very beautiful article about one of the most important writers and thinkers in the history of the Christian church, St. Augustine, who lived and wrote from the late 300s to the early 400s AD. But what I want to drag down to and sort of pull back for is this idea of inspiration. If we look in the Bible, and if you read the Bible cover to cover, the Bible is all about inspiration. In fact, inspiration is one of the technical terms that's used to describe why the Bible was even written. It's the idea that people were inspired by situations and by God to write and to record and to preserve and to tell the stories that are in the Bible, particularly the stories that matter the most. But there's all different kinds of inspiration. And we'll take just a second and make sure all our levels are good, and then we will come right back. Okay, so biblical inspiration. Dreams are a huge source of inspiration, particularly early on in the Old Testament. Jacob has a dream and sees angels going up and down on a staircase between heaven and earth, and it's called Jacob's Ladder, and he called the place the house of God, Bethel. There's situations and people. There's not only just dreams, but occasions and experiences that happen to people in the Bible. Some of them are grand and marvelous and amazing. You're going to actually read about one of those this week when you're reading in Exodus chapter 19, when we're talking about the law. And when you're reading that, it is a fascinating and moving and awesome. I mean, in many ways, it really is the word awesome. It is awe-inspiring. The presence of God in Exodus 19 as it comes down upon the mountain in the presence of the people of Israel after they're released from slavery in Egypt. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the other article. So with these religious experiences then, particularly in the Bible, these inspiring experiences, we see dreams, we see locations, we see activities, we see particular things that are done and so on that inspire people and that change people. And that's really the heart of the article and really what we're sort of want to talk about with this idea of experiences. The article talks about the term that Aristotle used to describe Sophocles' tragedies. When we watch a tragedy, when you watch a really sad movie or when you hear a really sad story, there is this emotional attraction, this emotional connection that happens between most people and those types of stories. And the breaking of those emotions and perhaps even the grieving or the tears that come from that. I will be the first one to say, being a Tolkien fan, I've always been a Tolkien fan ever since I was a small child. So when I actually finally got to watch the movies being made with The Hobbit, all three of them, and The Lord of the Rings, all three of them, despite variations that they made a little bit in the story, I cried like a baby at the end of each and every one of them because they're so moving to me. There's just so much emotional content there, and yeah, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we are supposed to be moved. We're emotive creatures. So in the Bible, then, when we see these dreams, as I mentioned, Jacob had a dream. Joseph has a dream and is able to interpret Pharaoh's dream and prevent the people from starving to death in Egypt. Daniel has lots of dreams. And then we've already talked about one location, if you'll remember, right, in Matthew chapter 1, with the story of Joseph involved in the Christmas story and the birth of Jesus, how Joseph had dreams, right? He had two separate dreams. One about taking Mary as his wife, and then a second dream that told him, hey, it's time to get out of here. Herod's going to try and kill the baby, and they flee to Egypt. So you've already been in touch with that, how the dream happened, but he didn't just see it as a dream. It was a dream that motivated him and moved him to take action. And that perhaps is the idea of inspiration. Inspiration makes us and changes us and helps us change. It drives us to new ways of thinking. It drives us to new ways of achieving things, and so on. It really is. And sometimes, as you see in a lot of the old cartoons, when a light bulb goes off on your head, bing, when the light goes on because you had an idea, right? That is that moment of inspiration. So we can look back in the history of Christianity, of course, not just in the Bible. Lots of people in the Bible. I mean, the entire book of Revelation, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks, is an inspirational, revelational vision that John has, and he records this vision in the book of Revelation, and it's striking and it's stark and it's so many different things, but it's about what come out of that, about what drew him to that, and what moves him in those visions to give us the message that he does as he talks with us in the book of Revelation. So yes, the Bible itself and its output and where it came from is about inspiration, but it's also about people like Martin Luther, right? The beginning of the Protestant Reformation. If you're just a little bit aware of European history, you've at least heard of the Reformation, when the Protestant movement began and rejected Catholicism and so on in 1517. Martin Luther was very much inspired by his reading of Scripture. We can talk about John Wesley, who's the guy who started the Methodist Church. Wesley had this experience of his heart being strangely warmed, as he spoke of it, when he was at a particular service in a particular location. You're reading about one person in the article, St. Augustine, right? It's a very moving and a very inspirational idea. Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, who was the first Christian, quote unquote, loosely Christian emperor of the Roman Empire, was moved by a vision that he saw. He saw the Chi Rho and put together that symbol and was told to go and conquer under that symbol, and went into battle, quote unquote, bearing the banner of Christ, so to speak. The Crusades, other different times when, and it's not that inspiration is always, it's not that it always inspires the best of behavior, but people are inspired. You'll read about Moses somewhat when you're reading later in this week in Exodus 19 and 20, dealing with the law and Moses being before God and so on. So there's these very, very deep ideas. Now, where we want to go with this, as talking about it being a fundamental experience, is this. A fundamental experience is one that redefines who you are as a person. It reorients your thinking. It changes the way you view the world. It positively, absolutely, in some ways, upsets your apple cart and completely changes the way that you're going to do things, and the way that you pursue things, and the way that you work, and your work ethic, and all the things that go along with that. Now, connecting that to a religious experience, of course, is going to involve the idea of God. It's amazing. I mean, there are literally millions upon millions of stories of people who have come to grips with the idea of God and the idea in the scriptures and in other religions as well. I don't want to short sell that, but we could talk about the people like the Buddha. We could talk about Muhammad. We could talk about other people in other religions. We mentioned earlier, just a couple weeks ago, about the Baha'i, the Baha'u'llah, and so on. People that were inspired by religious ideas and religious connotations that positively changed who they were, how they saw the world, how they interacted with people, how they wanted to and worked to see that vision become a reality, not only for them, but for other people. So the probably the strongest person I would imagine in the New Testament era that you might be familiar with, who you're actually going to be reading a little bit of his work this week in Galatians, is the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul tells us early in the book of Galatians, I'm not having you read all of it because I know you're reading lots of other things as well. But the Apostle Paul tells us his story, and he says, look, I was a Pharisee. I was somebody who was persecuting Christians. Paul was one who was going and knocking down doors, dragging people off to prison and bringing them before the councils and accusing them of blasphemy and all different types of things. Paul was an extraordinary religious person, an extraordinary religious Jew. But at the same time, we see in Acts chapter 7, where he's there at the end of Stephen's life. If you remember reading there in that last couple of verses, it says there was a man there who was in agreement with his death, whose name was Paul. So we go from that to 2 chapters later, and Paul's life has been turned upside down. Paul has had an experience with God. He's had an experience with the resurrected Christ on the road to Damascus. And as such, he has absolutely positively had his apple cart turned over upside down. Everything about his life changes gears. It's no longer about the law and him being a Pharisee. It's about him being a servant of Jesus Christ and being really one of that first generations of very strong believers, and literally comes to be called an apostle, as one who walks with Christ. So the Apostle Paul in the New Testament is an extraordinary example of what this fundamental experience can be like. Now, in the article you're reading, Aristotle, Augustine, and the Story of Redemption by Donald H. Kim. Like I said, it's a short article, but it's a very powerful article because it talks about human nature. And how in our nature, and it really sort of dwells in Augustine's story, and that really is the point. It's about the stories. I know in these times we're trying to keep up with what's going on in the world with the news. Don't do that 24 hours a day. You can only, you need to touch in, see what's going on, and then you need to put your mind elsewhere. Okay. Because there are lots of wonderful stories out there of people surviving and so on, but there's also lots of terrible stories and lots of terrible things that are going on right now. So we only need so much of that can lead you into depression, especially with not being able to be out, be around other people and so on. You have to take care of yourself mentally and brace yourself for that. Get some exercise, get fresh air. Don't sit around and watch the news, and don't respond to every story that comes across on your phone, because it will just simply push you places you don't want to go. But that's really is in some ways the point. We have this idea of what Augustine and what was going on with Augustine and how Augustine responds to the timing and the circumstances and so on. It talks about his story. So the question I'm going to ask you when you read the assignment, when you read the article, the story of Aristotle's writing about Sophocles, and then how Augustine comes in contact with that and how it affects him, particularly when he comes to read the Bible. Tolle lege is what the children say. It's in Latin. Tolle lege, take and read, take and read. And that quote is actually in the article. The story. What about your story? What inspires you? What has inspired you? Who has inspired you? What in your story has led you to do something different? Now, in these days, unfortunately, we've been inspired to do a lot of things that we wish we didn't have to do because of this virus. We, as upset as we were when everyone was ordered off of campus, because of just trying to keep everybody away from everybody. We were all upset. I know a lot of you guys were upset. A lot of you athletes and people who were participating in choir and music and all those group activities that are so important to you at this time of your life. As upset as we were about having to step away from the campus at that particular point in the middle of a semester, it's just unheard of. It's also, however, we've found now, was an inspired move in the face of difficult circumstances, which hopefully has saved lives. And so we have to see the whole story, not just where we're in the middle of it, but how the story affects us. So in this middle of this time, you know people who may be sick, people who may be hopefully recovering, you may know people who have died from this disease. That's part of your story. It's part of how the world and life has affected you. It's very easy sometimes to read the Bible and say, oh, well, that was just a Bible story, and wow, that really brought about a change, and here's life. Aristotle wrote about Sophocles hundreds of years before he lived, and the tragedies that Sophocles wrote. Augustine reads Aristotle, and he has this remarkable situation in his life that he comes in contact with the scriptures, and boom, it changes everything about him. These aren't just stories. These are real people. These are people whose lives were shifted and changed, and due to the course of the challenges and the problems and the difficulties that they faced, they changed, and changed drastically, and changed amazingly, and not only changed their own lives, but they helped change the lives of others and have affected the entire world. So in these difficult times, right, and I'll just say we're doing shorter videos this week, so I'm going to wrap up here in another minute or two. In these difficult times, be the inspiration. You yourself, right? Be in contact with people by phone. Talk to people. Don't just text. Actually call people and talk to them. Be the inspiration. Inspire your professors with your ability to respond to this terrible situation and finish out the semester in strong ways. And y'all are doing really well. Everybody's responding really well. And I know there's been some technical difficulties, but we'll get through that, right? You guys are serving as an inspiration to me. The fact that you didn't just throw up your hands and quit and say, this semester is just lost. No, it's not. You can be the inspiration, and that's something that I hope I can help you with a little bit along the way as well. So hang in there, right? Keep telling the story, keep reading the stories, keep passing the stories along, right? Try to inspire and be an inspiration to people during this time. So when you're reading the article, keep this in mind. Think about what it is to be an inspiration to someone younger than you, to someone older than you, and to let them inspire you as well. There's no shortage of good, inspiring stories going on out there in the world today. Those you need to read, those you need to hear. The other stuff, you need to know what you need to know to keep you safe, to keep your family well, and to get through this crisis. So, fundamental experiences that rearrange us, fundamental religious experiences with God, with the Bible, with the stories in the Bible, that really grab a hold of us and grab a hold of our spirit and grab a hold of who we are as a person, and that really literally changes us in every way, shape, and form, the direction of our lives, the things that we think, how we treat people, how we respond to the world. It is an amazing, amazing book. So we'll wrap up for today. We hope the shorter videos will suit your time a little bit better. And we do have a couple assignments due this week. You have to read the article, Aristotle, Augustine, and the Story of Redemption. And you have to write, there's a question to write on there. And then the other assignment is when we're talking about the law, the sources and purpose of law. And so you got a couple of chapters to read in Exodus and then a passage in the book of Galatians. And we'll talk some more about that in the next lecture. Okay? You guys take care. God bless. Be well, all of you, please. And as circumstances arrive, like so many of you have emailed me various problems and so on, keep me abreast. We'll make sure we get it all done. Okay? You guys have a great day, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.